Hello and welcome back for another episode of the season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. And today, this is actually episode 31, I think, which is amazing. We're halfway through the year almost of doing these every week, which is really awesome. So I hope that these have turned into episodes that you've enjoyed. This last week, training again was a little non-existent. I took a lot of time off. I did do some things, like I did go out for a few runs, and I did go out for actually a few walks as well. And we did a little, my husband just got a mountain bike, which he's very excited about. He still has yet to get me one, which means he can't go without me. So we messed around a little bit on that, but for the most part, it's just still been taking a little bit of time off. But today I am ready to get back into things and ready to get going. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Today, though, in this episode, I'm going to spend more time on our main part of this episode, because I get asked so often about hormones, and especially because this is, generally speaking, a women's platform. For female athletes, hormones come up a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean that men don't have hormone imbalances either. But today, what we're going to do is we're just going to dive into what hormones are in the body, and the different types of what you can see, and then how they can, especially when they are out of balance, what are some of the things that can happen if they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then the second part of this, what we're going to talk about is all the different types of reasons that can cause hormone deficiencies or imbalances. And actually, there's quite a few, and I get people messaging me all the time, or athletes in my office saying, I just don't understand. Like, I know that hormones are out of balance in my body, but I just, like, nobody can figure out why. And that's oftentimes because we don't actually think about how many different things can affect our hormones. So let's dive in. Hormones. There's so many different kinds in the body, but I thought the first one that we could start off with were thyroid hormones. So thyroid hormones can affect energy metabolism. They can influence energy processes during exercise. Virtually every single cell in your body uses thyroid hormones. And there's many different types of thyroid hormones. It starts with something called TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which then turns into T3 and T4. And the whole process of how you get there requires quite a bit of different types of vitamins and minerals. And each of them tend to do something a little bit different. But as a whole, you need thyroid hormones for energy. And they make up a good portion of what we think of as metabolism. They also regulate cardiac function. They also actually have something to do with protein synthesis as well, which is something that we need, especially in the terms of building more muscle tissue and muscle mass and recovery. And then they also are very important as far as keeping our calcium levels at a normal level that we want to see them. So calcium, I know you know of as being one of those vitamins that we want to take in all the time. But as far as it goes in our bloodstream, the body really likes to keep a calcium level at a very, very particular level. And so anyway, thyroid hormones can help you with that as far as keeping calcium at just the right amount. The other types of hormones that we have in the body are considered steroid hormones. So we make these in-house, which would be, in other words, called endogenous hormones. And we need them to help maintain energy storage, as well as we need them to help us build muscle. And they can also play a role in increasing oxygen capacity. They can help with decreasing fatigue and also improve our recovery time if we have a good balance of them. Your steroid hormones are things like testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone. Pretty much every hormone starts out as testosterone and then becomes the rest down the line through different conversion rates. So that's in both females and males. So no matter which side you fall on, testosterone is the top one. And then they become estradiol and progesterone through a conversion factor. So those are our steroid hormones. Also under steroid hormones are things like cortisol and aldosterone, which help with regulating metabolism, help with our blood sugar levels, as well as maintaining a good water and salt balance. So there's a lot of different types, and I didn't even touch on neurotransmitters, which are, there's so many of them: serotonin, dopamine, GABA. There's so many different types of neurotransmitters that are also considered hormones. And so you can see there's many different types of uses for hormones and why they're needed as far as athletes go. But as you can also, probably think as well, if they're out of balance, or even if they're in excess, they can cause problems, right? Like, for example, excess cortisol can cause muscle breakdown. It can also cause fatigue and inflammation. And on previous podcasts as well, we've talked about specifically for women who have higher levels of progesterone throughout their entire month, of their cycle, but especially after ovulation, that can also cause muscle breakdown. So we're trying to have just to get people to be, women in particular, to be aware of these changes so that we can make sure that we leverage our nutrition to help balance some of those imbalances. Or that's not necessarily an imbalance, I should say, but those changes that happen throughout the month. There are also, and I wanted to talk about this specifically as far as some of when there are fluctuations in hormones, particularly with female athletes or women, it can actually cause an increased risk of certain types of injuries during different phases. So a couple of the things I wanted to talk about was, first off, the anterior cruciate ligament, which is called the ACL in the knee. Injuries seem to be more common to this particular ligament in the follicular and ovulatory phases, which are not the high hormone phases necessarily, but there's just some, these fluctuations in hormones can create a little bit more stress on some of your ligaments. And so that's why we tend to see that. And this is actually very unique to ligaments because the ACL has estrogen receptors, which inhibit a certain type of collagen synthesis, especially type 1. And so there's some studies that are suggesting that we see more ACL tears, particularly when women are in this certain phase. There's also an interesting protective effect of progesterone, and it can help in cases of concussions. But when estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest, that's when we tend to see some more severe outcomes and symptoms from concussions. So there's some different areas where hormones can be really helpful, and also not so helpful as when it comes to injuries. And I think the biggest piece is understanding that when we have those fluctuations in hormones, there are certain things that we can be doing to help kind of counteract them a little bit. So what we're going to talk about next is what can cause these disruptions in hormones, so that you can do your best to either figure out where some of the disruption in hormones might be coming from. If you're one of the people that was like, hey, sign me up, this is something that I am struggling with. Or if you want to make sure that you're keeping all of your hormones in balance, because they clearly do have quite an effect on how the body functions. So keep listening, because we will be right back with more after this. So what disrupts hormones? I'm about to list almost 10 different areas where hormones can be disrupted due to different things that happen in our life and in our body. The number one that I wanted to talk with is my favorite one, which you all might know about that by now, is nutrition insufficiencies. So either vitamin or mineral deficiencies or insufficiencies can all cause some issues as far as creating hormones. Everybody always says to me that they're so surprised when they see athletes who have insufficient levels of vitamin D. And I'm assuming that this is because athletes have a tendency to spend a good amount of time outside training, so they don't think that this could be an issue for athletes. But I always look at the people who say that with just such a quizzical look, because if you know how much vitamin D is used by the body, especially for athletes, it's more of a wonder that more doctors aren't checking for it and screening for it. Vitamin D, especially like insufficiencies, can be due to the expression of vitamin D receptors in muscles that can cause basically a decrease in circulation in the vitamin D that circulates throughout the body. And this is most commonly during high muscle activity, right? So when you're training, when you're exercising, muscles have a tendency to try to pull vitamin D in. So in addition, it's also needed for bone health, right? It's also needed for immune regulation, which we're seeing more and more of. But we've known this for a really long time. Vitamin D is really great. And it does have some roles that it plays as far as lung tissue goes, and then also in the cells when they are exposed to viruses. So I've known this for quite a while, but it's very, very important for your immune system. It's also very common for people to get sick when vitamin D drops, as well as vitamin D can be used in protein synthesis, so making protein. It can also be used for cell growth and the muscle strength and function, as well as it does have some roles in the inflammatory response as well, both for acute responses where you really need the inflammation to be there, but also for being, I think it can also have an anti-inflammatory effect in some cases as well. But one thing that, and here's the thing, right? So like vitamin D has also in other areas been shown to potentially increase sports performance as well. So we're not just talking about how it is helpful for health and keeping your body healthy, which keeps you training, but it also could potentially play a role in increasing aerobic power and capacity, as well as potentially, I think, helping out with vertical jump height. I read a study about that, but I don't know if they were able to duplicate or replicate that one. But vitamin D also, especially in our older generation of people, we've found that vitamin D can help to prevent falls. And they don't actually know why. They just saw in multiple studies that if people were taking vitamin D, they were less likely to fall, which falls are one of the leading causes of hospitalizations and mortality in our older generation. So decreasing falls is a big thing. It's why we see all these sorts of balance classes and all that. And anyway, I get down on, I digress, but vitamin D is very helpful for all these different areas. And we don't always know exactly how or why it works the way it does. But vitamin D also, the last thing I'll say on this, can also play a big role in muscle regeneration following injuries. So if you are deficient or insufficient before going into an injury, or if you are training throughout your training period going into competition, and you are slowly working your way or quickly working your way towards a vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, we can see a lot of issues as the outcome of that insufficiency. And I highlight it as much as I do because it's something that I see all the time, and I see it with myself as well. So it's one thing that I think needs to be checked and screened for more. And the last one I'll say on nutrition insufficiency, which there's, as I mentioned just at the beginning of this podcast, of this episode, there's so many different types of nutrients that are involved as far as getting thyroid hormone from TSH to T4 that I'm not even going to touch on any of those, but just suffice to say that there are many different types of nutrients that are essential in order to get your body doing what it needs to do and in order to keep these hormones being produced and at the right levels. The last one we're going to talk about, though, is iron. And athletes require so much more iron because it's required to help build up red blood cells due to the requirements of exercising regularly, basically, because of training. athletes also have a tendency to require a little bit more as far as aerobic output goes. And one of those adaptations is to promote delivery of oxygen-rich blood to muscles, right? To increase. And so what you need to do is have an increased blood volume so that you can bring all of that oxygen to the tissue level. And that's one of those physiological adaptations that just happens, right? Is this that we see cardiac size and function increase, which then enhances the offloading of oxygen. So iron is one of the biggest pieces of how you basically build the red blood cells and increase that blood volume. Iron is also, I don't know if I actually knew this before I started looking into it a little bit more, but iron is also an important factor when it comes to what is called the electron transport chain. And anybody who has taken enough biology classes or has had the opportunity to probably just shivers and shudders at the name electron transport chain because it's talked about so often. But essentially what it is it's just a really big main producer of energy in the body. And iron is part of the process that you need to have in order to get this system to work, which is obviously one of the things that's really important. What also though for thyroid, iron is important as far as hormone synthesis goes, as well as vitamin D, as well as vitamin A, E, selenium, as well as iodine. There's so many different things that are needed for essential thyroid hormone synthesis. So there's more than just that. And then lastly, iron is also pretty important as far as brain development goes, and deficiencies in iron can lead to difficulty focusing. It can lead to a lack of motivation in a sense. And they've even, I guess, suggested that there's some lower just affected decision making when we see pretty severe levels of low iron. But I think the point that I wanted to make as far as just to kind of wrap that all up is that what we know is when we see deficiencies, we see the symptoms that come out of it. And we notice that overall people tend to have different types of symptoms like fatigue, difficulty focusing or lack of concentration. And with all of that then comes, lower motivation. And then we also see that their performance as far as sport is going down, right? They're not performing as well as they want. And then we start investigating to see if there are nutrient insufficiencies or deficiencies. And that's when, it all comes to light. But you can look at it from that perspective, but also recognize that you need to make sure you're having all of these different types of things coming into your body because they may not directly make it so that you are performing better or that they may change something about your sport that gives you that extra bit, but they are helping you to do what you need to do every single day. So that's just one piece. So the rest are going to go a little bit faster than that. But another reason behind hormone imbalances can be genetics. And this one we see as far as there's so many different ways that genetics plays into this is because your genetics can influence how you synthesize hormones, how you break them down. And then of course we can see different types of conditions that can then cause issues with for example, thyroid, hypothyroid, hyperthyroid, particularly hypothyroid tends to be like women will say, everybody in my family, all of the women in my family have a thyroid problem. So there's obviously genetics can play quite a role there. Insulin imbalances is another reason for hormone imbalances. Insulin, the reason for that is partially because our blood sugar balance can play quite a role in how we create hormones and how we use them. So oftentimes women will come into my office and say, I don't understand. I'm trying to do all of these things. And if there's some insulin resistance, or if there's diabetes playing a role, or if their body just is not responding to insulin very well, and they're basically riding that blood sugar roller coaster all day long, where, you start the day off with sugar, and then you're basically managing these highs and lows of blood sugar crashes all day long. That can create a lot of issues for hormones and for hormone synthesis and creation. Poor diet is another reason for hormone imbalances. And I say that, and I don't love the terms of it, but it's essentially, if you're not eating foods that have this information in them, if they don't have vitamins and minerals and the things that your body needs in order to make these processes happen, we see signs of malnutrition here in the United States when people or kiddos are eating foods that are pretty much only processed and highly refined foods. We see, and it doesn't look like the malnutrition of if somebody doesn't eat for a while, but it's the opposite. We see a ton of issues as far as health goes, because they aren't getting these vitamins and minerals that are the building blocks to creating healthy hormone balances and all the other things that the body needs in order to do it well. So making sure as an athlete that you're eating enough of very good foods that are filled with different types of vitamins and minerals, which means eating the rainbow, lots of different colorful fruits, vegetables, all that stuff. All of those are part of making sure that you're getting enough. And that also includes protein. Another one can be alcohol and smoking. And I think those go for themselves as far as why they can cause hormone imbalances. I don't think I need to camp on that one for too long. Food allergies and sensitivities can also be problematic for hormone imbalances. That's partially because if you have a food sensitivity, particularly food allergies are a little bit more obvious. Obviously, you get your anaphylactic response, and people tend to not want to go near those nuts and tree nuts and seafood and all that kind of stuff, right? We know food allergies are food allergies. However, food sensitivities are a little less obvious, and they can create a bunch of inflammation for the body. And then that is what can then lead to hormone imbalances down the line. So as you can see, it's starting to stack up, right? A lot of these pieces are things that we may not be able to see right off the bat, and they're just kind of happening underneath the surface of the body. And you wouldn't really be able to tell that they're an issue. All that you know is that you clearly have some issues as far as hormones go, because you're experiencing them on a daily basis. But there are some underlying issues that are causes that are harder to track down sometimes. But food sensitivities can be anything. Right? They can be anything that we eat on a daily basis. We just don't necessarily experience them as food allergies. Other different types of causes behind hormone imbalances are things like chronic inflammation, infections, traumas, toxins. That's kind of like, let's throw everything else into the hole and just see what comes out. Hormone imbalances, especially they can be caused from low grade infections. And I as well as just this like kind of chronic inflammation that seems to happen throughout the body. Chronic inflammation can have a root or a cause in traumas. So that could be from any growing up, any trauma or anything that's happened throughout your life. Traumas can create inflammation, especially if they've gone undealt with for a long time. But also, I'm talking about low grade infections, like if you have like dental health, right? If you have inflammation in your mouth and oral health, and that's something that's not being tackled very well. And we have this kind of, there's bacteria that's growing up around the gums. And then that is causing periodontal disease. those are low-grade infections that can over time just create this response from your immune system that has to just constantly be fighting this thing. And then that can lead to other issues down the line, and that can also contribute to hormone imbalances. A couple of other ones here before we wrap up. Poor sleep can lead to hormone imbalances, as well as acute or chronic stress. Another one that people I don't think always know is that increased adipose tissue, so a little bit higher levels of fat, can also lead to hormone imbalances. And that's partially because once adipose tissue is created, it can then it actually creates its own hormones that then try to create even more adipose tissue. And then that over time can lead to hormone imbalances. But the interesting thing about that is that along with increased adipose tissue, you also usually see insulin imbalances, right? So you're starting to look at two different things that may be causing it and causing each other. So we're starting to see a connection here as far as a lot of things go. And the last one, which is my favorite one of all, which is the gut. So GI dysbiosis, GI dysbiosis is where different types of bacteria are living in your gut, and we want certain types of bacteria to be there and not others, or we want at least things to be sort of kept in balance. But when things get thrown off due to any of the things that I just listed above, that can cause different types of bacteria to grow that we don't really want to be there. And then they can wreak havoc on our system, as well as kind of contribute to inflammation, which can then, contribute to what we call intestinal permeability or leaky gut, which, by the way, can also cause food sensitivities and can also cause insulin imbalances, right? So there's so many different things that the gut contributes to and does have some play or some role in. And of course too, it also can, if it's inflamed, it can cause inflammation elsewhere as well. So the gut is a really cool thing to look at, particularly when it comes to hormone imbalances. And the last one is this thing called beta glucuronidase, which you can find on some GI panels. And what it is basically it's created by anaerobic bacteria in the GI tract. So if you have this GI dysbiosis, and if you have this high amount of this anaerobic bacteria in the gut, what happens is when the liver is trying to get rid of hormones like estrogen, for example, if you've created estrogen and then you used it up, now the body needs to get rid of it so that it doesn't continue to float around in your bloodstream and tell your brain or your body to stop creating more estrogen. So what happens is the body takes it to the liver filters this out. It does this as well for any kind of medications or drugs, any toxins, anything like that. The body does the same process. It gets filtered through the liver, and then it gets bound with some of these different types of compounds, essentially, and that then gets deposited into the bloodstream to get to the GI tract, and then also to the through your urine and sweat and all of that. But a good portion of this goes into the GI tract to be eliminated. And what happens is these anaerobic bacteria can take that compound. So what the hormone estrogen was bound to, or any type of medication or whatever, and then it can decouple it. So then now you have estrogen going back into the body, back into the bloodstream. And that can cause higher levels of estrogen and hormones and create a whole bunch of imbalances and things like that. So, there's actually quite a bit that you can do. There's some certain types of supplements that can help to lower that beta glucuronidase, but you obviously need to fix what's going on as far as that anaerobic bacteria that's overgrown, and work on that GI dysbiosis as well as that leaky gut, usually because there's usually a high amount of inflammation there at the same time. So as you can see, there are so many different reasons and ways that the body can cause some certain types of hormone imbalances, and they're often overlooked, right? They're not often dug into. People aren't usually looking at all the different areas. So for athletes, because hormones play such a huge role in how our body functions, but also in how we perform, as well as just getting the most right out of all of the training that we do. It's pretty important that these things are functioning as well as they need to be. So keeping on top of all of these different areas can be a very helpful way to first off, keep your body healthy, but also be able to perform well. So that's our episode for now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you being here. And I just wanted to ask, if you liked this episode, I would love it if you could share it with somebody that you know that might find it helpful. And also, if you could leave a review on the podcast app that you listened to this episode on, that would be so helpful and amazing. It really helps get this podcast out to more people. And that would be great. So you can also make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels, including TikTok. And you can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can also find me at drkirstin.com. And if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to submit, we would love to hear from you. You can either find Wisp Sports or I, Dr. Kirstin, on any of those social media channels. Come leave a question with us, or you can email info@wispsports.com. Okay. Well, it was great going over this with you all. I hope that you found it helpful, and thank you for listening, and I will be back next week. Take care.